after this case, certainly. Let's speak now to Gloria Browne-Marshall. Professor Browne-Marshall is a professor of constitutional law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Your reaction then?
I was so nervous, and I've seen a lot in my time being a civil rights attorney and researching and writing books on constitutional law and racial justice history. And so I was just anxious. And as I listened to each verdict, I got chills. My reaction is one that this case had so much weight on it from around the world. The fact that your listeners and viewers cared about what went on in the U.S. with this man in Minneapolis, that means a lot to the African-American community. I'm a scholar, but I'm also a human being. And I understand that we've been under siege for so long in this country that it was even this ray of hope of wanting to believe justice could take place was sometimes too much to bear, because we've been crushed to the ground so many times with Philando Castile and Breonna Taylor and Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, and you just go on and on and on. You know this, so I'm relieved. I know that there's going to be a request for a mistrial, that they want to overturn the verdict, but I'm hoping that the appellate courts will see what was done here, and that was justice.
Well, for now, certainly Derek Chauvin has been led away, handcuffed, remanded in custody, bail revoked, sentencing due in 8 weeks' time, we heard there from Judge Peter Cahill. The crowds are still there. They don't want to leave, do they? We've seen tears, hugs, chants, cheers, applause. No doubt many people doing the same in their own homes as well, watching this. What do you reckon?
Yes, but I also remember what happened after Joe Biden won the election. People were in the streets, they were cheering, they were dancing, there was music. And then we had the attack on the Capitol by these supporters of Donald Trump. We know that this country is filled with militia groups and the Oath Keepers and all these other white supremacist organizations. We're fearful in a way of what that backlash is going to be, because this nation is so truly divided around these lines, that justice, what we believe is justice for George Floyd, could be an instigation for a civil war from these militia groups.
You don't hope this will be a healing moment?
I know it can be a healing moment for those of us who are seeking justice, but I also know over 1,000 people are dying at the hands of police every year in this country. And there have been about 35 trials all together in this nation's history of police officers who have committed these heinous acts. So, yes, this can be a healing moment, but I also want people to understand, what are white people going to do differently? The hope is supposed to be born on the shoulders of people of color, but there has to be something done in other communities to change this. And that means that more police officers have to be in those handcuffs. They have to hear the guilty verdict. They have to know that their actions have consequences.
The crux of this case, obviously, the video that went around the world that was filmed by a 17-year-old at the time. Absolutely important evidence, no doubt. But how much harder for George Floyd's family did it make the case, having to watch those pictures again and again?
I can tell you, I watched the Eric Garner strangulation again and again and again on television, but they only show black people getting killed. They never show white people get killed too at the hands of police. They never show those. Those are videos as well. I mean, we don't want to become numb to the harm that black people and other people of color live under by police and by white civilians as well. So it was horrible for all of us. We're traumatized by that video to understand the full extent that this man could plead not guilty to putting his knee after the pulse was gone. Derek Chauvin still had his knee on George Floyd's neck. We need to understand it. This man symbolized a part of this country, a cancer in this country. That's what Derek Chauvin symbolizes. So he's not the only one. There are plenty of other Derek Chauvins around, and they're waiting to put their knee on someone's neck. And hopefully the justice system, the prosecutor's office, will step up as they did here and prosecute these officers and send the message that we won't tolerate these murders.
Professor, what happens now to the other police officers who were there at the time?
I am so glad you asked that question. That has been missed. Those other officers can either take a plea deal and decide that they're not going to try to sit and use the justice system, or to decide their fate. They could decide their own fate by taking a plea deal from the prosecutor's office, or they're going to decide. One of them, just keep this in mind, one of those officers had only been out of the police academy for 48 hours. Derek Chauvin was his training officer. So Derek Chauvin was training these young recruits how to terrorize the black community. So those young people are going to have to face trial. They're going to have to decide, because they sat back, they took an oath to serve and protect, and they sat back and let Derek Chauvin lead them down a path of folly that now has given them criminal consequences.
Normally at this time, Gloria, we would take a look at the newspapers here in the UK, but this is so seismic, so historic, so important for the world. We'll continue our coverage of what has happened in Minneapolis, the guilty verdicts for Derek Chauvin in the death of George Floyd. 3 guilty verdicts. And Gloria Browne-Marshall, you're a professor of law. How will the textbooks be rewritten for this case, do you think?
It's going to be written in 3 major ways. One is our U.S. Supreme Court has given this reasonableness standard, and that's why you heard it in the case. If this had been a civilian-on-civilian case, once the evidence presented, they would say, is this person guilty or not guilty? But with a police officer, they take the next step, and they say, this police officer was acting as a reasonable police officer would, or was this action unreasonable? I think that has been part of the problem. This standard now must be changed. Also, this sends a message to all police officers. We have 18,000 police jurisdictions in this country. And so it's sending a message to all police officers that you too could go to prison for brutality against civilians. The third thing it does is it supports national criminal justice reform, because it shows us, yes, this is expensive to have trial by trial, but if we change the law, if we put pressure on these prosecutors' offices to bring more cases, then we can have justice in this country, and perhaps have the hope you've been talking about, because people may be able to trust the police a little bit, because right now there is no trust for police officers among communities of color.
And just one final thought. We heard already from Joe Biden, the US president, saying he'd got to know George Floyd's family. He had felt that the case against Derek Chauvin was overwhelming. Do you feel the door is open there to bring in some of those national changes that you talked about?
I think so, because we have a criminal justice system that is based on slavery, on slave catchers, on putting down the Native Americans when they've risen up. We have night riders. We have a horrific history in our policing. And they claim our police departments came from the Bobby system, but actually even that Bobby system has its racial past. So when we're looking at changing, we have to have national reform, because even if we change one part, for example, in New York City, where I live, but we don't change other cities around it or other towns, then we're going to end up in another situation with another George Floyd, and we cannot have that as a nation. We have global protests on behalf of George Floyd, but over 1,000 people die at the hands of